So if you've been following us from the beginning, thank you so much. If you just discovered us, thank you so much. We hope you continue to learn and discover new environmental topics relevant to LA with us. And I'll introduce Chris Imhoff, who will be your presenter today.
Hi, everybody. As she said, I'm Chris, Tree People's Director of Program Development, and I am pretty passionate about our local native plants and even grow them in my own yard. And so through the years, I've helped develop our how-to guides, resources, and videos, and I'm super excited today to share some of these, this learning and these resources with you.
And I just wanted to say, please feel free to use the chat to engage with us, ask questions. We will be addressing all the questions at the end through a Q&A session. So feel free to just post your questions in the chat throughout.
All right, so it makes me so happy to see people interested in converting their landscapes using native and climate appropriate plants and learning how to make them look so lovely that hopefully not only will you enjoy your gardens more, but encourage others to plant natives as well. So let's learn a little bit about maintenance. I put this here because I wanted you to know that you're welcome to take notes, but we will be providing you all sorts of resources via email afterwards. So you'll receive things like this monthly maintenance checklist, links to our various different videos. And one of my favorite things is that we also have a native plant starter list that gives you specific maintenance guidelines for specific native plants. So sit back and enjoy. So before we get started, I would love for you all to answer this question in the chat room. What are the elements of a happy native plant garden? Again, what are the elements of a happy native plant garden? Any thoughts? A diverse mix of plants, yes, good companion planting.
Someone also said mulch.
Mulch, yay, we're gonna be talking about some mulch today. Low water use plants, yes. Water tolerance. Yeah, see, you guys know a lot of this stuff. But yes, right selection of shade plants. Well, hopefully, you know, what we're covering today pulls in all of that, you know, but we're looking for a happy native plant garden is one with healthy soil, supports climate appropriate plants, has thoughtful pruning and maintenance practices, and a ton more. So let's go ahead and look at this more closely. But first, I wanted to share with you a 9-year study that was done on 2 houses. One with mainly grass there on the left, and one with native plants there on the right. So guess which one has the least amount of water use? Guess which one has the least amount of green waste created? And guess which one has the least amount of maintenance needed? So for those folks, yes, the one on the right, yeah. So if we go to the next slide, basically all 3 are the home with a native plant garden. I wanted to share that with you because not only does it support having a native plant garden, but you're here to learn more about the maintenance, which requires less time and effort, right? In fact, a typical yard with grass and shrubs, maintenance happens on a weekly basis, right? Especially if you're cutting grass and hedging bushes. But our native gardens really only need a good deep maintenance about once a month, right? So let's go ahead and jump in, and we're going to start with soil. So what does soil have to do with maintenance? Any thoughts about that? So healthy soil is essential to a thriving native plant landscape. Yep, it's key to healthy plants, exactly. You want a soil that acts more like a sponge and less like a brick, you know, that's compacted. Also, native plants are adapted to various different ecosystems, which means they, yes, or a sieve. I'm getting drawn into your answers. Yes. But anyways, they have specific soil requirements, both in texture, drainage, and nutrient value. In fact, most of our local native plants are adapted to nutrient poor soils, so they don't require things like fertilizers, but more on that later. So, you know, it's good to know what kind of soil you have so that you can have the right plants for your landscape. As an example, some plants like this purple sage on the screen here do fine in sandy or loamy soil. They like good, fast-draining soils, but not soils with a lot of clay. So if your garden has a high clay content, you shouldn't plant purple sage. Instead, you might plant something like white sage, which does fine in sandy, loam, or clay soils and is a good alternative. So how do you find out what kind of soil texture you have? So soil texture tells us how much sand, silt, and clay we have in our soil, right? So sand is the largest particle, as you see this illustration here on the left. So sand is the largest circles, right? These particles are round and they are about the size of the end of a number 2 pencil. You can easily see these individual particles. I mean, think about the sand at the beach, right? Larger than this, the particles are considered pebbles. Also, because they're so round and large, water moves through them very easily, right? So if you think about a glass with ping pong balls in it, and if I were to pour water, there's a lot of air space, right? So that water can move through. And we go ahead and show the next image. Right, so there on the left, you know, sandy soils, there's a lot of pore space, so water moves a lot faster. So the next size is silt. So on the left there, you'll see that little red dot, right? So silt is the next smallest particle. Silt particles are also round, but they're much smaller. In fact, you'd need a microscope to see the individual particles. Silty soils are slick and slippery when wet, and kind of the texture of flour when they're dry. And then lastly, clay is the smallest particle size. In fact, it's so small you'd need to have an electron microscope to see the individual particles. On the left there, like you can barely see the little black dot, right? So unlike sand and silt, clay is flat, right? And so they're more like a plate sitting on top of each other rather than round. So because of that, water can't move through it very fast, right? So clay soils have an extremely high water holding capacity because water is moving slower. And so typically when we're testing our soil texture, our soil probably is a combination of the different textures of sand, silt, and clay, like the image there in the pyramid. So how do we figure out our soil texture? Well, luckily, we have some guidelines that we will be getting to you after the program today. But essentially, oh, and there's even a video. I did a video for tree people on Facebook and on Instagram, so you can check that out as well. But essentially, you're getting a handful of the soil. This is pushing away the mulch, getting down to the real mineral soil, adding water to it, creating a ball. You know, if it falls apart, it's probably very sandy clay. But essentially, you're getting a ball, and you're learning to put, and you'll be pushing it over with your thumb over your forefinger to see how long of a ribbon of soil you get. So based on that, and then actually feeling the texture of your soil combined, you'll look at the chart that we have for you, and it'll give you the indication of the amount of sand, silt, or clay that you have in your soil. Another test that's great is the soil percolation test to see how fast your soil drains. If water percolates slowly, it's typically because of the soil's texture, or it could be from compaction or from both. I put a rain garden in my front yard, and it was important that I did a soil percolation test so that when it rains, the water being directed into the basin, I wanted to be sure that it drained fast enough and not had pooled water, right? So another good reason. And then I have all my natives planted in and around it. But anyways, like I said, we have instructions basically for how to do both of these. But the soil drainage test, it's essentially digging a hole, filling it with water, and seeing how long it takes for that water to drain. If it takes 6 or more hours, you have a high clay soil, and it's probably not a good idea not to have a rain garden, but you may, if for certain native plants, you may need to kind of look at other options for growing plants that don't do as well in clay. All right, so moving on. So to help your soil act more like a sponge, we suggest adding mulch, right? So mulch is carbon-based and ideal for sustainable landscapes. Mulch is applied on top of the soil, right? Unlike compost that is mixed into the soil. The usage of mulch is key to helping build the soil, because depleted soil that is kind of devoid of organic matter has poor structure and is typically compacted and doesn't hold water. And so this makes it really difficult for plants to get the necessary water and nutrients to their roots. So mulch also holds moisture, it reduces evaporation, it insulates the soil from heat in the summer and cold in the winter, it helps with water absorption, reduces weed growth, and is broken down by worms and microorganisms, which help kind of bring down that into the soil, creating pathways for the needed water and oxygen, right? So part of the maintenance of your native plant garden will be to regularly apply mulch to the garden, more so at the very beginning, like this picture here on the left. When you first have your native plants. Once they get larger, they'll be producing their own mulch from their plants. And so applying mulch will happen mainly in the first couple years as your plants get established. What you'll want to do is place a good 2 to 3 inches or 3 to 4 inch layer of mulch around the plants in bare soil areas. And then be sure to kind of pull the mulch away from the very, the base of the plant, just so that you don't want to create what we call mulch volcanoes, and then where it holds moisture around the base of that main branch or stem. Let's see. And as I said before, you know, using mulch is really a great way to create healthy soil. You don't need fertilizers. In fact, it's really not necessary to spend your money on chemical fertilizers to ensure healthy plants. As I shared, natives actually prefer the more nutrient-poor soils, and chemical fertilizers are not so good for the water cycle either. When they wash off into the storm drains and then flow to the ocean, these nitrogen-rich fertilizers cause a rapid growth of algae that negatively affects fish and other aquatic life. So, you don't have to worry so much about, you don't have to worry about fertilizers with native plants. It's great. All right, so getting more onto the plans, what does climate have to do with maintenance? Any thoughts there? All right, so choosing plants that are appropriate to the climate zone of your region will better ensure plants will grow at their best, right? Climate appropriate, yes, more rain, less watering. We're definitely going to be talking more about that, Noelle. Climate appropriate refers to the use of trees and plants that may or may not be native to the area, but are appropriate to our climate zone. So when I think of the climate here in California or on the West Coast, It's really different than the climate on the East Coast, right? They get a lot more rain, it's colder, it's snowy. Their climate and their plants are very different than what we have here. Even though there are plants that grow here that were originally from the East Coast, right? And prefer a lot more water. Even here in California, the climate of Southern Cal is different than Northern Cal, right? And even here in Southern California, I know that the climate near the ocean is a lot different than the climate here where I live in the valley. So it's important to kind of know your climate zone so that you're picking plants that like the climate you're in. So nicely enough, in the next slide, the Sunset Magazine came up with climate zones that take into consideration total climate, including length of a growing season, timing and amount of rainfall, winter lows, summer highs, wind and humidity. And they came up with our climate zones. And these zones will guide you in choosing the right plants for your garden. My climate zone, for example, is 18 because I live in the valley. So I don't know if any of you can see your climate zone looking at this. If you're not on this list, you may be on the next one. And Emmy, I think your climate zone is 22, right?
Yes, that's correct. Climate zone
So there's
22.
there's going to be some plants that do better in where you live than where I live. Anybody else? You see your climate zone? Someone's got some in 24.
Someone is asking, what is 24? What is the climate zone in 24?
Well, if you're looking at the map, it looks like you are right up against the coast. But anyways, we can send you the link to this site so you'll be able to see what your climate zone is up close. So to help with maintenance of specific plants and help you in choosing some of the right plants for your garden, we have a native plant starter list. And I've already got it in the list of stuff that we're going to be sending you for both climate appropriate native plants and also climate appropriate non-native plants. Looking at this up close, let me go through the chart a little bit to give you an idea how the climate zone and the soil and even the amount of sun exposure and all of that can really help. And like I said, we'll send this to you so you won't have to see this super up close. But looking at the second one on the list, it's common yarrow. And I can see that it's great in zones 18 to 24, which means that both my yard and Emmy's yard can have common yarrow. It's a low water use plant, that's the L. And there is, in the back of the list is the legend to tell you what all of these actually mean, right? So knowing that it's a low water use plant, I'm going to want to choose other low water use plants and hydrozone them, plant them all in the same area so they're getting all the same kind of water that they need. Looking at this a little further, it likes sun to partial shade. Here you can see soil, it does well in combinations of clay, loam and soil. Next to that, height and width. Now this is important because I've learned a lesson planting my own native plant garden, right? When I went to the nursery and I got like a Cenotes, a Yankee Point Cenotes, I didn't realize it was going to grow huge, right? To grow super wide. So I planted other natives around it and now they're kind of overlapping each other and pushing each other out. I also planted it semi-close to my, to the sidewalk. And so I'm constantly doing more maintenance because I have to trim it back. So it's important that when you're looking at your native plants that you're choosing, you'll want to find plants that you're going to want to look at what their size is going to be at maturity and space them out appropriately. I hope that makes sense. Lastly on the list, there's some flower color in season when you'll get them. And then the best part there on the end is some specifics about maintenance of that particular plant. So we don't have all the native plants, but this is a great starter list for you. So even seeing with the yarrow, it's telling us to prune out, you know, the dead flower heads. Oh, and that yarrow can be trimmed down pretty flat and will come back nice and bushy. Yes, I will be sharing. Oh, Emmy's answering that. All right. So I hope you're going to find this list to be pretty spectacular to answer a lot of your questions about some of the specific plants. All right. So now let's talk about some of maintenance tasks. So in talking about pruning, when looking at removing branches on trees or shrubs, understand that plants seal rather than heal. Okay, so it's different than, like, if I were to cut myself, my skin heals up, right? But when you cut a plant, they don't heal. They actually have wound wood that seals over. Okay, and so all I'm sharing with you about that is that when you make a cut to a plant, you want to be sure that it's thoughtful, you know, that you're making cuts on purpose. And when pruning in the garden or with trees, we think about the 4 Ds. So those are what gets pruned first. So if we look here, we're going to look at dead branches. So look for branches that are brown and dry. And an easy way to tell is to scrape the bark to see if it's green underneath. You can do that with your fingernail, or sometimes I take just the end of my pruning shears just to nick it a little, just to ensure that it's dead. If I don't, and so you can cut back out the dead wood. What I found is if I don't continually prune out those dead branches, that I get a lot of dead branches underneath my shrubs, right? And so it builds up underneath, and then all the green and new growth happens on top. So, and then it becomes more maintenance because I'm trying to get all the dead stuff out from underneath. So try to continue to remove those dead branches. The next is D is diseased, right? So look for sunken areas along branches or the trunk, or oozing or discolored areas like you see in this image. It'll be important for you to prune the diseased branch back to at least 6 inches below the diseased area into healthy wood. All right, and so go to where the end of that branch is and go about 6 inches back into a healthy bud and trim it there. Another thing that'll be important if you're cutting out diseased branches is to disinfect your tools with 91% rubbing alcohol between those cuts, right? Because what you don't want to do is cut into diseased wood and then end up spreading it with your pruning shears. The next D is damaged. And so a rugged cut is harder for a plant to seal over with that wound wood I was talking about. So if there are any broken branches, make a clean cut back to the proper place on the stem. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. And then lastly, deranged is the last D. And so deranged, these are kind of these crazy deranged branches, are those that are rubbing against something like another branch or the trunk, right? And so these are branches that are starting to rub, and by rubbing on each other, they can potentially make a wound and an entry for disease, right? So they're too close to other branches along the trunk, making it too crowded. So I put this picture in because this is an example of a branch that should have been trimmed sooner. And what's happening now is that as the plant grows, it's creating even more of a rubbing issue, right? Eventually, so you don't want this to happen, so do it sooner than later. All right. So making cuts. So it doesn't matter if it's a native or a non-native plant, a low water use or a high water use plant, they all react to pruning cuts the same way. So, so you'll be able to do this in just about any garden. And I'm not going to talk today about how to do pruning cuts on trees, on larger trees, because that's a whole different sort of pruning, and we'll save that for a tree pruning class. But however, when pruning shrubs in your garden, there's still a right and wrong way to do it by using a heading cut. And so what you'll see is these can be used to induce branching on a shrub, or they can be used to shorten long, thin branches. So what you're going to do is there on the left, you're going to look for an outside bud, and you're going to cut it at a slight angle, right just above that bud, but not too sharp or past or catching that bud like the middle one there. That's too sharp in an angle. And then what you definitely don't want to do is just top the branch, right? Like you see there on the far right, because what happens is if you're not being thoughtful about it and you're just trimming as you're going and you're leaving some of that wood above the bud, that wood dies and can be a place again for disease or insects or bugs to get in there. Or sometimes if it's on larger branches, just by topping it, it causes this flush to happen and that much more maintenance for you. And so, you know, for example, if you've got a bush plant and you're using, you know, these hedging shears and you're just cutting across a bunch of branches, probably you're doing exactly that. And you're just going to create a lot of dead wood, or you're going to create, you know, a flush of more branches. So anyways, most people also wait to prune plants when they're dormant, which is, you know, typically what happens is when it's growing season again, they will sprout back a lot to replace what was cut off once, like I said, that growing season happens again. And that's because because of all the stored energy, right? So just waiting for it to be springtime or whatever season it is for new growth to begin, you're going to again cause more maintenance for yourself. So if you prune a bit all year, especially, you know, your native shrubs and what, they won't react as strongly and you won't get that big push of growth, and you'll be able to kind of keep on top of it. All right, so let's see what this means to some general plant maintenance. All right, so I'm going to talk about edging. Remember, I was talking about shearing, and so edging is when a plant is blocking a path, or as you will see in this video. All right, go ahead. So this is out in my front yard, and this is that giant Cenotes that I have. And too bad I had already trimmed it back from my sidewalk. But so I went ahead, and what I'm showing you here is over to the side where there's some branches sticking out. And what I'm looking for is, I don't want all the branches to be the same, cut at the same length. So I'm finding a spot, I'm looking for a nice bud, and I'm trimming just ahead of it and leaving just a slight angle. And I'm looking for another one, and again, not at the same length, so it looks natural, right? So I'm trimming it, but I'm looking here. We got a little, little endpoint, so I trimmed it again. And I think I've got one more cut here, just to give you an idea. Looking back, I'm going to go a little further in and trimming it out. Because again, you don't want to create shrub balls or squares, right? So you want it to look like it's natural growth, but we're just trimming it back. All right. Okay, so another great technique is deadheading to keep blooms which is a great thing to do, especially in spring, to keep blooms going on in your yard. Oftentimes you can, and I'm going to show you in a minute, but you're going to pinch off or snip off the dead flower growth, the stems there, and it'll cause another flush of flowers, which is fabulous. Also, you can pinch back into some of the plants again to create a flush of growth that will get your plant to look a little more bushy and less kind of lanky, right? So let's go ahead and see here. I have a purple sage, and my purple sage here, you'll see a lot of dead flower heads here. But again, I'm going back to some nice young growing bud there of leaves, and going right up to it and snipping. And the reason why you see, even here in the summertime, that I have not deadheaded my purple sage is that this is a great plant for seeds. And so I leave the seed heads on for my local birds and wildlife. And so probably closer to the end of the summer, I'll come out and do just what I'm doing here. I'm going back, finding the bottom of where it's dead and just trimming it out. All right. So raking and cutting back. I don't have any grasses like this or grasses. If you have tufts of evergreen native grasses that have brown, dead blades, especially as they, get on in the season, they start to look not so great. There's an easy fix. Really, all you have to do is use a rake and go right in and rake them out, and instantly you'll liven up that look of that plant, right? Just pull it through and then remove the dead and brown leaves. Another thing, when cutting back, you can cut back deciduous grasses that will help rejuvenate and cause, some new growth to happen, which is fabulous. If you cut back dormant grasses, you can do it to about 2 to 4 inches tall, before like new growth is about to begin, before the season, right? You can cut back perennials to a bud, leaving about 2 to 4 inches to, again, cause that rejuvenation. I can tell you that we have some of these grasses in front of Tree People's Conference Center, and at first it looks pretty devastating when they're cut back, but within a week, you see all this new flush of growth and they start to look great again. And then my least favorite is weeding. So weeding is probably the one general maintenance task that needs to happen the most. It's basically removing any unwanted plants. When you do this, you're going to want to be sure to remove the plant entirely, including the roots, and definitely before they go to seed. I find that a lot of the neighborhood weeds, find my garden. And so if you don't stay on them, they can overtake your garden. And they end up competing with your plants for water, nutrients, light, and pretty much can dominate the space. So a couple of examples, you see here the foxtail over to the right. This invasive grass produces these seed heads that resemble kind of wheat or barley. And once they dry out in the summer, ooh, those barb seeds will spread. And then they dry out and their seeds are all over. And not only will you see a double flush of that in the next season, but these seeds are really bad for animal fur. So if you've got a dog, they're pretty awful. So if I see these coming up, I am out there pulling them up like crazy, and I have to continually stay on them. Another really bad one, especially for animals, is the burr clover. You can see the seed head there in my hand in that one picture. What's crazy about this one is that it's like this low growing spreading plant that looks kind of cool when it's first growing. It has these tiny little flowers, but if you don't stay on it, those flowers turn into these burrs, and then the whole plant dies out. And again, you've now caused the seeds to go into the soil for the next season. And if you happen to be walking or doing maintenance or walking in your native plant garden in your bare feet, it is not fun. The other one that drives me crazy is the Bermuda grass. This is a low growing grass that grows above, but underground it has rhizomes, so it spreads down underneath. And I've had some luck using a nice thick layer of mulch to kind of hold it back, but I have a couple of other areas that I'm still struggling with that I'm constantly pulling out, that I am thinking about experimenting with orange oil to try that. But if somebody else has another suggestion, I'd love to hear it. And then lastly is our classic weed is our classic weed with the bright yellow flowers that we all know is dandelion. And what some people don't know is when you're pulling off that lovely powder puff and blow it to make a wish, you're actually sending the seeds off into your native garden. And so it's up to you. They're awfully pretty, but I try to get out as much as I can, and most definitely before they go to seed. So again, remove the entire plant, including the roots if you can. Trim or remove the plant before it goes to seed. Mulch is great. Clean your tools after working, in your yard. Again, you don't want to be spreading any of the seeds. And then if you are pulling up and you're pulling up weeds that have gone to seed, don't put them in your personal compost bin. Put those into the green bin for the city, because again, you don't need to be spreading more of the seeds. All right. So another thing with maintenance in your native plant garden is to clean your garden tools and pruning shears. I mean, it's super key. And I wasn't so good at doing this at first. And I learned from a good friend that this is a practice that is really important, and it makes maintenance in my yard so much better and so much easier when you're using clean, sharpened shears. And so really, if you're starting out with clean, sharpened shears, when you're finished at the end of your pruning, simply spray the 91% isopropyl rubbing alcohol on the blade of your pruners, your loppers, and your saws. Wait about 20 seconds and then wipe it off. And so this not only kills fungi and bacteria, but it also helps to remove tree and plant saps, right? Also, as I said before, you should also disinfect between shrubs if you're suspecting any sort of disease. But it's always a good practice to do this cleaning before you put your tools away. So if you're needing to properly sharpen your pruning shears, use a single cut file to sharpen the blades of both your pruners and loppers. You'll want to place the file on the beveled edge, so be sure to look and see which is the beveled edge, and angle the file so it's at the same angle as the bevel on that blade. And you're going to push the file against the blade, starting at the sharp edge and moving upward against the bevel, trying to keep the file at the same angle as that bevel, right? And you're going to lift it up each time. You're not going back and forth. You're just going with one motion in one direction, all right? And when that beveled edge is nice and shiny, then you're finished. If you want to prevent your tools from rusting, use a drop or two of the 3-in-1 multi-purpose oil or a spray of WD-40. And this includes not just the blade, but also the spring and any metal parts. And if rust has developed on your tools, you can use an emery cloth, kind of a fine grit sandpaper, to gently, you'll apply some oil, and using that nice fine sandpaper to get some of that gunk off, and a cloth to wipe it, and just keep reapplying your oil until you can get it all clean. And then if you've got, like in this picture, if you've got saws, a great thing is to use a wire brush. All right, great thing to do. So before we finish up, I want to talk a little bit about watering. In general, number one, never keep to a strict automatic schedule. With native plants, this isn't like our the old traditional gardens of grass and shrubs where you turn on your sprinklers 2 or 3 times a week and let it run for X amount of time, right? Your watering is changing now because and we'll get into this more in a minute. It's seasonal, and it depends on how mature your plants are, if they're younger plants or older plants and more established, because a young garden generally will require more water than your established garden. Next, you want to check your soil before watering. Do not water if the soil is already moist at the root level. Native plants, unless they are specific to a high water or like more riparian plants, you're going to want to be sure that you're not over watering. So if it's already moist at the root level, you're going to want to check and wait until it's dry. So you can do that by using your finger or a moisture meter. Another thing is, if you're using mulch, be sure that if you're watering, to check first to make sure that you're not just watering the mulch because it's holding a lot of that moisture, but it's actually getting down penetrating into the soil. And so double check before you're done with your watering. And then lastly, we're going to talk about this next. Winter water is essential to sustaining plants through our dry summers. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. So to understand about when and how much to water, you'll need to understand our seasonal rain patterns, right? And so here's a chart with the months and the total water level. So this first chart shows our typical rain pattern in Southern California. It rains in the spring and in the winter. You can see there in January, like 2.75 inches, right? And then it starts to dip down and to where we get almost no rain in the summer. I mean, right now we have no rain, right? And then it'll start going back up, potentially getting more rain again, after October. So in this next slide, when we plant high water need plants, right? Here's their pattern of need, right? So when we plant things like lawns or, ferns and acacias, looking at this chart, they don't need that much. They don't need as much water in January when we have our rains, but they need most of their water in the summertime, right? And so we end up watering, using a lot of water just to maintain these plants. And so in the next slide, even if we end up using moderate water plants like roses or star jasmine, they don't need as much water, but they still need a lot of water in the summer when we actually have no rain, right? And if you even look at this, they don't want that much water in January when we're actually having rain happen, right? So in the final slide, this is the best, because as you see, our native or climate appropriate plants, they follow the pattern of our seasons, right? And so they need most of their water in our winter months when it rains and almost no water in the summer. So you can see that when we plant native plants or climate appropriate plants, they follow that line. It basically eliminates the need for wasteful excessive watering. And so all the more reason to plant natives. You know, they not only save water, but that also saves money. But what I want you to take note of, when we have winters during periods of drought, it's imperative to water your plants thoroughly during those winter and spring months. You know, as you saw, this is the period of time that those plants expect and require their waters. So if winter rainfall averages are not met by the end of January to kind of early February, it's necessary to provide extra water during this time to help bring water levels up to that winter average of what those plants would expect, right? In looking at the Southern California Native Plant Maintenance Primer, it says to soak the area for 6 hours using, you can use like an oscillating sprinkler to create kind of that simulating rain, to mimic rain, yes. And then, you know, once a month through April is a strategy to do that, to try and get the amount of rain that those plants are expecting. And then during the summer, keep the soil on the dry side, and because again, you know, these plants are not used to having kind of a wet, moist environment during the summertime, and you don't want it to encourage pathogens to come and kill your plants. I made that mistake. I had this beautiful mallow, and during the drought time, it happened to be under a tree that I was afraid would die during the drought, and so I put some hose, you know, some soaker hose in and around there to get water into the roots of that tree. Destroyed my mallow, died away. So you have to be really careful, and so they're not expecting that much summer water. Okay, so I hope you've learned some stuff today. As I said, what we have for you that I'm going to send on to you is just a monthly maintenance checklist. It just gives you some questions to ask yourself each month. If it's yes, and you're great. If it's no, we've got your answer of what you should do and consider. It's 2 pages long, so it goes into more than just soil, trees, and plants. It also includes things like water capture systems and like rain barrels and whatnot, just to giving you some hints of what to think about. But essentially, once you're following these practices, you'll pretty much know what you need to do each month. But this is a great way to start. So good luck with your garden maintenance. Like I said, we'll be sending you on all these resources. Also, on our website under our blogs, I've written a lot of maintenance stuff there for you to check out. And I guess we can go ahead, Emmy, and see if there were. Well, I did see some questions come through.
Yeah,
so hopefully I can answer them.
I'm sure you will be able to, Chris. Thank you so much for that informative presentation. I can't wait to have my own yard one day so that I can rewatch this video and start my own native plant garden. So the first question is asking about the climate zone's relationship to USDA planting zones. I'm not sure if you talked about that, but
I didn't go into it. All I know is that what was great about Sunset Climate Zone is that it included all of those factors that I listed, you know, as opposed to theirs isn't as in depth. So I would use the climate sunset zones.
So not as in depth. Great. So I think Mid-City was zone 22. But we were gonna send out that map, right, for the zone.
Yes. In fact, let me make a note because I don't think I have it initially, but I can certainly send you a link to where you can get it.
Great. Yes, and all of these resources will be shared afterwards. And then Jason says, I applied the mulch layer, but I'm getting a little round fungus growth. Not sure what it's called, and mushrooms too.
Well, fungus is good. It depends, you know. I'm not a fungal expert, but fungus is part of a healthy soil web, right? And so what we're trying to do is have the mulch break down and make its way into the and make its way into the soil, where you can have those microorganisms utilizing all of that to help again open up some of the pathways for water and air and encourage a living soil.
Great. And then we have a question from Claudia. Besides deadheading, does purple sage need to be pruned during summer?
No, I wouldn't personally. I wouldn't touch my purple sage doesn't look terrific right now because I'm just letting it be, essentially again to allow the seed heads to be there for the birds. And then after the summer, when it starts to cool down, because again my native, they're kind of in a dormant stage, and I don't want to stress them into thinking they have to shoot up, right, and create new growth. So I'm letting them be, and then when it starts to cool down, I'll go out there because it's driving me crazy, and I'll start deadheading it and looking at again how to trim it again to contain the space, because it's growing out into my little pathway there.
Great. So then next question from Katie is, how does watering vary for newly planted plants versus established plants in the ground for at least 2 years?
Good question. So if I wouldn't plant any new native plants right now. It's too hot. And again, we're not supposed to be watering right now. So when it starts to cool down and it looks like we're starting to get rain and we're getting into planting season, growing season, when you're planting those young natives, you can water them, once or twice a week, to get them going, and they'll be indicators for you to see, and again, if it's wet or you get a rain, don't water them. Test and make sure the soil is dry, and then probably when the plant has doubled in size, it's probably established. And again, you're going to want to let the rainy season water them, and then in the summertime, again, it's a tough one. Take a look at when you look at the plant list to see which ones are low water use. Some are a little more moderate water use, and you may have to look it up more specifically because it is going to depend on the specific plant. Did that answer your question? I hope.
Yes, she says, thank you. Last question from Claudia. Should we assume that succulents are native and don't need too much water? I have a lot in pots that I'd like to plant in my yard also as a way to reduce the water use.
I got a lot of succulents too, and I love them, and they are great. And they similarly hang out during the summertime, right? And then are happy when they do get a little bit of water. I'm not a succulent expert. I do know that I believe it's Dudley Eye that is a native succulent, but I have all sorts of different kinds that pretty much based on how they're looking, give me an indicator of giving them a little bit of water. But again, I don't know a whole lot about succulents other than the fact that I do have some in pots and I do some that are doing fabulous in the ground. And I'm in the valley,
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for the questions. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I think we're finished. Oh, we have one last question. I planted some Cali sagebrush in late April, 1 5G and 2 1G. The 5G is still green, but the 1G plants are now brown. Are they dead or just semi-deciduous?
Again, our sagebrushes look a little, if you were to go out and walk in the wild, the sagebrushes right now look a little sad because again, they're kind of in that dormant state. And so, I would wait, but again, you can take your finger and test one of the branches to see if it's green in there or if it's dead, and they don't all make it. But if the one is doing okay, hopefully it'll make it through and you can you know, count on some good fall rain. Again, don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, right now a lot of them are looking, they're kind of in that holding pattern.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Claudia. So our next topic in 2 weeks from now will be Oaks of the Santa Monica Mountains. So that one's going to be super exciting, all about our oaks, which is a keystone species. So please follow us, keep following us, tag us in pictures and videos of anything related to trees. We love engaging on our social media, and email us if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.